So welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. We're working our way through the 3 volumes of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma, which is a digest of about 15 years worth of talks given by Trungpa Rinpoche at seminary every year to about 150 to 250 students over a period of 3 months each year. And those periods were divided into the Hinayana teachings, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. So the Profound Treasury, the book, are 3 volumes. It's divided in the same way, and we are on the 2nd volume, the Mahayana, and we've been working our way through this, especially the more theoretical part of the Mahayana having to do with Shunyata and Prajna. And now we're coming to the more practice-oriented part, having to do with the teachings about training the mind, called Lojong. So we're on chapter 33, and Barry is going to start off tonight. Mr. Cunningham?
Whoops. There we go. Okay, welcome. This chapter, as John said, is turning from theory to practice and is an introduction to the Lojong slogans of Atisha, which we will be spending some time with. So he begins, so far our approach to the Mahayana has been a philosophical one, but to experience reality properly, we very much need an application or working basis. We need to change to a slightly more contemplative approach. Actually, you can see a pattern in many of these teachings that have come before of going from philosophical to contemplative, from theory to practice, on the cushion, on the street. I think there is a difference here in that the Lojong slogans are clearly directed at behavior. They are direct, pithy instructions to contemplate and apply when relating to others. He says, we may have begun to understand the Shunyata principle or the teachings on relative and absolute truth, but what are we going to do with them? I'm reminded of the part of the story of the Buddha and his enlightenment, that after achieving enlightenment, as the sun rose and he arose with it fully enlightened, he then spent some time in the forest, alone, wandering. And I imagine him there having just had his mind totally blown, having entered a new world in which everything had been transformed, and saying something to himself like, holy moly, and then what do I do now? Like, what next? So, having been liberated from suffering opened a whole new world of possibilities. And as arduous and difficult as his path had been, his real work began after enlightenment. And to the extent that each of us has gained some understanding and experience of Shunyata, begun to realize our own Buddha nature, we may ask ourselves, what now? Now what? He says, so at this point, we need to shift our emphasis from the theory of the Bodhisattva path to the practice and experience of it. And he asks rhetorically, what is the difference between theory and practice? Theory is understanding the possibility of egolessness, and practice is actually shedding our ego. The effect is relating with reality according to the Bodhisattva path. In other words, becoming a Bodhisattva. One element of this is that the focus of our practice of meditation has been on technique, maintaining good posture, working properly with our thoughts and feelings, learning to see the nature of our thoughts and our dreams. So now in the Mahayana, the skills that we have developed are put to use. We begin developing the ability to stay awake to whatever arises in every situation. He says, at the practical level, how you are going to go about this is largely based on practice and personal discipline. He goes on, in the Mahayana, our main concern is how to awaken ourselves. The Mahayana takes quite a lot of effort because it's a big job. It's a big deal. It's a big deal because we're taking on the cessation of suffering of all sentient beings. And it's a lot of effort because our habitual patterns of thought and behavior are not easy to change. They're very well established. We've been doing things in certain ways for our entire life. Most of the time, in fact, we're navigating on a kind of autopilot. And that autopilot has gotten us this far, and we rely on it. So, starting at the Hinayana, along comes the first noble truth: life is suffering. Simply acknowledging that is not a trivial matter. And then, of course, the second and third noble truths say that the source of our suffering is within ourselves, and therefore it is possible to transcend it. So, all of that is a big deal. And now, of course, in the Mahayana, we're enlarging that. And the Hinayana was largely about taming the mind. Now in the Mahayana, it's about training the mind. So it is a big deal. That pursuing this means moving out of whatever remnants of false security and comfort of our familiar personal environment, giving up escape into thoughts and dreams, and then engaging with the world at large. The Mahayana is no joke, he says, and you had better not fall asleep at the wheel. But you can't go wrong with Mahayana heavy-handedness. It is the best kind. Heavy-handedness? He goes on, the Mahayana is very harsh, but it is also very gentle. The intention is gentle, but the practice is harsh. Heavy-handed, harsh. Harsh, I think, in the sense of disruptive or decisive, that applying, you might say, applying the paramitas of discipline, exertion, clarity emerges, seeing our fixations for what they are. And then we can wield Manjushri's sword of prajna to cut through our fixations to ego. That's kind of harsh from the standpoint of ego, but at the same time gentle. Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, is known as he who is noble and gentle. And of course, gentleness, compassion are hallmarks of the Mahayana. He says, by combining the intention and the practice, you are being both harshed and gentled. That process turns you into a bodhisattva. It is like jumping into a blender. There is a softening of this solid sense of self. This legend of I and other begins to dissolve. We're changing our allegiance. It is a transformational process. So our attention has to be gentle, but our practice is not wishy-washy. I think we become our own parents in a way. As a parent, you don't allow a child to do things that you know are harmful. And sometimes that requires decisive action that can seem harsh. Sometimes You may have to just let a child cry. This can seem harsh, but of course, we are gentle in our intention. And you might say that child self in each of us, which is ruled by ego, needs to be trained. He says the technique of shamatha vipassana does not change very much in the Mahayana. It is pretty standard. The only difference is the idea of an enlightened attitude or bodhicitta. So that enlightened attitude is the attitude of humility and true compassion. That you're willing to dedicate yourself to others, that others actually are more important than yourself. When you take the bodhisattva vow, he says, you are actually transplanting bodhicitta in yourself. So, once again, this is transformational. He mentions a spiritual friend. Out of bodhicitta comes the idea of working with a spiritual friend as a guide to your practice. As you may recall, the role of the teacher or the guru changes as you progress along the path, and in the Mahayana, that becomes a spiritual friend, which is a teacher that you develop a relationship with. That could be someone here or whatever. But I would just say, encourage you to meet with a teacher. So, this is a big deal. It's a big project. And as he says, you better not fall asleep at the wheel. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to John.
Thank you, Barry. So these teachings, called the Lojong teachings, arrived in Tibet about the beginning of the 11th century, around 1000, with the arrival of a teacher from India named Atisha Dipankara. And he established a school in Tibet called the Kadampa School. Kadampa means training in the word. Ka is word, and Dam has to do with training. And the word really here is the same word as in the Kagyu sect. Kagyu means the lineage of the word, or the continuity of the word. And the Kadampa school was really the first introduction of monasticism into Tibet. I mean, it had been there in the 8th century with Trisong Detsen a little bit. Shantarakshita came and was trying to establish a monastery in Lhasa, having great difficulty. But really, it hadn't taken hold. And with Atisha, it did. One of his main disciples, or one of the most notable members of the Kadampa sect, was Gampopa, who also became a student and a disciple of Milarepa. And so, whereas the Kagyu sect had been primarily yogic prior to the arrival of Atisha, after that, Gampopa, who was a student of Atisha, brought monasticism into the Kagyu sect as a student of Milarepa. And today, the Kagyu sect, the head of the sect is the Karmapa, and there are monks and nuns. Trungpa Rinpoche was raised in that tradition. Prior to the arrival, just to give you a quick synopsis of what had happened in Tibet, Padmasambhava arrived in the 8th century, and received the patronage of Trisong Detsen, the king at the time, along with some other teachers like Atisha, yes. And they brought Buddhist teachings, including the Dzogchen teachings. After the 8th century, there was a persecution of Buddhism in Tibet by an evil king named Langdharma. For those of you who are Jewish, he was kind of the Haman of Tibetan Buddhism. He didn't last long. He was assassinated by a crazy monk. But there was a suppression, and Buddhism went underground for almost a century or more. And really, it was only in the 10th century, with the arrival of Atisha and some other things, that Buddhism came out and became the dominant religion and cultural force in Tibet again. So that's by way of background a little bit. The Kadampa tradition had two main strains. One was contemplative, and the other was scholarly. The contemplative strain of the Kadampa tradition is what the Kagyus embodied. And the scholarly was really what the Gelugpas latched onto and influenced their development. And the Gelugpa tradition, in fact, has remained much more scholarly throughout the centuries, while the Kagyu and Nyingma sects, emphasizing the contemplative tradition, are sort of regarded as being the more practice-oriented sects. And this is what we're going to follow in. Atisha's Lojong teachings were summarized by one of his main disciples, a man named Geshe Chekawa Yeshe Dorje, a Tibetan. And Geshe Chekawa Yeshe Dorje summarized these teachings of Atisha into what are called the 7 points of mind training, the 7 points of Lojong. And in fact, they're summarized into the 7 points, which contain 59 slogans. If you wish, you can purchase these, I think, on Amazon. There's a deck. And what that says is Lojong, mind training. And when you flip through them, sorry there's such a delay, on each card you get a slogan. And so you can, this says first, train in the preliminaries. This is the very first slogan, actually, and we're going to be studying that next week. And you can change them every day, just sort of pick one at random, and or however often you like, and contemplate them. There are also some books by different people on the slogans, and we may be bringing in some readings from Pema Chodron. She wrote a book about this, training the mind slogans. And also there's another book by Trungpa Rinpoche called Training the Mind, which I'm going to be considering sending out part of. So Trungpa Rinpoche's discussion, as it's communicated here, is based on this text by Geshe Chekawa Yeshe Dorje, this disciple of Atisha Dipankara, going back to the 11th century. And it's also based on a text by a man who lived in the 19th century named Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Taye. He was one of the great teachers of the 19th century. And he was also the previous incarnation of Trungpa Rinpoche's root guru, whose name was Jamgon Kongtrul, but a different Jamgon Kongtrul. When Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Taye, the Jamgon Kongtrul the Great, died, he was so enlightened that he had 5 incarnations, one of which was Trungpa Rinpoche's root guru. So Trungpa Rinpoche studied a text by Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Taye, Jamgon Kongtrul the Great, called the Changchup Shunglam. And I'm actually forgetting what Shunglam means. Lam means path, Changshuk means enlightenment. I think it's really the developmental path to enlightenment. And he studied this. It's about these slogans. And there are 59 of them. And we are going to be going through them in the next few weeks. Rinpoche says they were very simple. I don't think you're going to find the first, rather the second set having to do with absolute bodhicitta and relative bodhicitta is quite so simple. Then they get simpler after that. But he says they were very simple because they were meant to educate the Tibetans, who were very savage people. And so they needed something to sort of tame them down. So they were simple instructions to be kind to others and were quite revolutionary at the time because there wasn't much law and order in Tibet, he said. In fact, what happened was that Atisha, in coming to Tibet, he was worried, these slogans, you need neurotic situations to apply them to because they are cures for our neurosis, ours and the situations we find ourselves in. And Atisha was afraid that the Tibetans were going to be too nice and that there wouldn't be enough neuroticism. So he brought along his servant, as they call it in the text, his T-boy, because his T-boy was really irritating. And he brought him along to provide necessary irritation. And then when he got there, he found he needn't have brought him at all. The Tibetans were utterly irritating. So that's a famous story about Atisha's T-boy. And Rinpoche says the slogans are very simple and not particularly philosophical, but one of the great Kagyu teachers called a grandmother's finger pointing. And I'm sure you will find some of them to be that way. Although next week, I don't think so. We'll see. And he says back then, lots of students were illiterate, lots of the Tibetans were, and not very philosophical. And so these slogans were used, something you could easily memorize. And I recommend that, as we go through these and you find them inspirational, you memorize them. And they will come to you during the course of your daily life and be very helpful. He says, after studying Buddhist philosophy, the slogans might be a relief in their simplicity and ease of practice. Just follow the book and do as it says. Relief. Again, don't be put off by next week. It's quite philosophical and difficult next week, but after that it does get simpler. He says the simplicity of this text and Jamgon Kongtrul's commentary on it is so precious and direct it is almost as if it were written for peasants. The Changshuk Shunglam, that's this commentary by Jamgon Kongtrul, is somewhat rugged, but at the same time it is soothing. For a simple romantic Buddhist who has immense feeling toward the teachers and the teachings. And he recommends we understand these teachings and memorize them. This is a way, really, of taking the theory and the practice, of especially Shunyata, Prajna, the theory of the Mahayana path, and of bringing it into our lives. And that's what this is meant to be. He says the most important point of the slogans is to develop ultimate bodhicitta, where compassion comes from. Ultimate bodhicitta is you're beginning to develop egolessness, because it's in egolessness that compassion comes alive. As long as we hold to an ego, any compassion that we, or at least a lot of the compassion that we feel, is going to be very intentional and pious. But with the discovery of egolessness, which is to say shunyata and all of that, then we're freed from this belief in a self. And we can actually begin to practice compassion in a very genuine way. He says, it is an unconditioned state, this development of shunyata, where you begin to realize that you and others do not exist. Therefore, you are able to extend yourself. which gives you joy and further joy. It makes you smile and appreciate the world. You could dance and appreciate the phenomenal world. Dance with and appreciate. At the Hinayana level, which is where we are, you disown your arrogance and competitiveness. This is what is taught in the slogans, to disown our arrogance and competitiveness. Surely a good thing. And beyond that, at the Mahayana, we're acknowledging our basic goodness, our fundamental bodhicitta, our awakened state of mind, that it's already there, that in fact we have it, which is quite a revolutionary thing to do, and really undercuts the ground of ego. Ego is all about self-attack. Ego is all about self-doubt. Ego is all about the flip side of self-attack and self-doubt, which is self-improvement. And it's a very anxious and unhappy state of mind. So in discovering egolessness, in discovering where we're developing an enormous amount of confidence in this state of being that is already here, that we can relax, that we are in fact basically good, wholesome. The idea of basic goodness is that number one, we all possess it. And that really what it's saying is that we in life are basically fundamentally worth being here for and are wholesome for no reason at all. For no reason at all. It's just fundamental. It's the way things are. He says, by witnessing the spiritual friend and the spiritual friend's disciples, he doesn't say that because he's talking about himself, but it's really true. But especially, they're sort of the mirrors or the echoes of the spiritual friend. In this case, our spiritual friend is Trungpa Rinpoche. And all of his students, like me and everybody else, are the echoes of him to some degree, each in our own capacity. He says, by witnessing this, you see that you too can do it. So an overall feeling of positive atmosphere and positive logic is created. We're moving into a very different world. The world of samsara is a world of fear and self-attack. And this world is a world of confidence and appreciation of ourselves and our relationship with this world. He says, because you have developed such gentleness and sympathy for yourself, you begin to feel frustrated with those who cannot click into this possibility. You feel sorry for them. And out of that frustration and sorrow, you develop compassion. So it's important to understand the structure of the slogans, the 7 groups, the 7 points of mind training. Next week, we're going to discuss the first, which is first train in the preliminaries. And there are actually 2 different kinds of preliminaries. We're going to be talking about what are called the common preliminaries. And for those of you who are familiar with this, these are the 4 reminders. And I'll be sending this out. There's a little thing that Trungpa Rinpoche actually translated and created a version of the 4 reminders that we in this sect chant sometimes. Joyful to have such a human birth, difficult to find, free and well-favored. But death is real, comes without warning, this body will be a corpse. Oops, let me get something. Hold on a second.
Maybe while John's gone, I'll make a pitch for this thing here, which is a wonderful resource by Pema Chodron called a compassion box, which contains a set of the cards and a CD with Tonglen instructions.
Well, it'll have to wait till next week, I'm sorry. But it's actually going to be appropriate next week too. So these 4 reminders, and that's what we're going to be studying first. These are called the common preliminaries. You may have heard of the preliminary practices, the 100,000. Those are the special preliminaries. So we're going to be studying the common preliminaries. So the first slogan is about these preliminaries, and the second slogan is about bodhicitta, and this is going to be difficult, and maybe I'm going to send out some extra readings from different authors. Pema, Trungpa Rinpoche himself in his book, Draining the Mind. There's some teaching on this by Tulku Ujin, and we'll just see. So in this second set of slogans, the second of the 7 points, second set, we start out by simplifying the practice into the ultimate bodhicitta level, which is really saying the same thing as egolessness, shunyata, prajna, and then applying it, making it workable, which is the relative bodhicitta level. And then come the post-meditation slogans. And these are all about applying these teachings in everyday life. And there it gets very practical and nitty-gritty, and it's going to be kind of fun. And I'm going to maybe suggest that people can try to actualize the slogans in their daily life and give a report on what happened. We'll see. He says that the slogan practice is based on the 6 paramitas because we're would-be bodhisattvas, and we're like knights of the medieval tradition, wealthy with generosity, perfume, armor, and weapons, and horse, becoming a really good warrior. So rather than studying the teachings in a scholarly sort of way now, one needs to mix one's mind and being much more with the Dharma, listen to and really hear the Dharma and put it into practice, how to study properly and apply what one has learned. This is an opportunity. What counts, I'm reading a quote here, is actually knowing how to apply the teachings. And this will come with the study of the slogans, learning their geography, like learning the geography of a town. You can practice these slogans with anyone you relate with. The real trick is remembering to do it. He says the slogans are always applicable, so you have lots of opportunities. Slogan practice is universal. The idea is to use the slogans in dealing with anybody who is around us, anybody within our radius, anybody who comes into connection with us. Could be shopkeepers, people you meet on the street, anybody. You can actually sharpen your prajna by relating with people in this way. And in fact, what it requires, among other things, is remembering to do it. Because we tend to walk around in habitual patterns so much. And practicing these slogans breaks those patterns. It makes us come back to something else. Slogan practice is delightful, he says. It is very direct and personal. And I'll drink to that. It's really true. Everything is spelled out. They are reminders. And each time a certain slogan occurs to you, the slogans as a whole become more meaningful. And then finally, he closes with this idea of cause, effect, and essence. When you begin to understand what each particular slogan is about, its essence, as it were, then you can apply it as a cause and see the effect. And I think that you'll find that the effects can be rather startling, something you might not have expected. So I'm going to stop here, and we can have a discussion. I think this is going to be kind of fun. I do recommend, if you feel like it, go onto Amazon. You get, where do we get this deck? Is it through that Compassion book of having you do?
I'll put a link in the chat. I found it on Amazon and
I think it's on Shambhala too.
yeah, Shambhala, sure. I like this set from Pema, which includes a CD and the cards and the book. And the CD is guided Tonglen instruction and practice. I'll post a link to the thing on Amazon, but you can find it elsewhere.
If you're going to discover, Tonglen is a big part of training the mind, exchanging oneself for others. And there are subtleties to it and variations on it that you might find interesting and challenging. So, discussion. Oops, somebody's telling me that this chapters on the first preliminaries is actually in 2 weeks. Is that true? I'm forgetting what chapter 34 is about.
That was me, John. Yeah. Laura.
Okay, chapter 35. You're right. It's about aggression. Great. Okay. Laura will be teaching that next week. Well,
I have a quick question about the last point that you made. When you said, memorizing these and trying to apply them on a daily basis, and you'd be surprised at the outcome or the consequences. And you mentioned something about karma or somehow becoming an agent of change. I don't know, I just would like you to elaborate on that.
let's discuss it more as we go along. It works better when we're discussing particular slogans and their application and our experience in applying them. Otherwise, it's going to be theoretical, and it'll involve me telling stories, which I really don't want to do at the moment.
Fair enough. Thank you.
You're welcome, Marian. Thank you. Dan, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Mark.
Hi. I just I was reading it. Supposedly the slogans are all based on the 6 paramitas.
Well, in a loose way. I mean, they're not connected with them one by one, but they definitely, they're Mahayana. They're about the Bodhisattva activity, and they will definitely involve each one of us if we practice them, practicing these slogans in the paramitas very much. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Gampopa was such an interesting guy. He started out as a doctor, and then a plague killed his family, his wife and children. And so he entered the monastic life as a monk in the Kadampa tradition. And then he met Milarepa, who was a wild yogi living in caves. Lots of stories about him, their relationship. And he became Milarepa's foremost disciple, sort of nudging out Rechungpa, who had been his foremost disciple, but he was also a very important Rechungpa. And Gampopa was the first head of the Kagyu sect. And lots of stories about him. One story is that he had these close disciples, and they were performing tantric ceremonies, 3 of them. And it involved drinking alcohol, which tantric ceremonies can involve. And they got drunk. And the master of discipline in the monastery threw them out because they were drunk. And Gampopa woke up in the morning and he saw these 3 guys wandering down the road far away. And he called them all back because he loved them. And one of them, they were 3. Yeah, and they were all deformed. One of them had a monkey face. One of them was a hunchback. And one of them had a gimp leg, couldn't walk with a gimp leg. And the one with the monkey face, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael or Barry, became the first Karmapa, the first head of the Kagyu sect after Gampopa. Is that right? Was the one with the monkey face?
I think that's right.
Yeah. And his name that Gampopa gave him was Tusum Khenpa, which means knower of the 3 times. And when we learned this from Trungpa Rinpoche, we used to joke that it was the 3 times were breakfast, lunch, and dinner time. Anyhow, a lot of color in these stories.
I think Christy has something.
Christy.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to get started with these slogans. It's gonna be so fun. I wondered about Geshe Kakawa, if there was any stories about him. How did he like meet Atisha, or like how did he was connected with Atisha? He brought the teachings from Atisha, right?
He received the teachings from Atisha, and I don't know much about him either. That's a great question. Maybe one of us could look into it and see what we can learn about Geshe Chikawa. I mean, over the years, the only thing I've really ever heard is that he codified them into the 59 slogans.
Okay.
Those slogans are his creation. But we'll
Thank
see.
you.
Maybe they're more
Okay.
stories. That'd be fun.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, there you are. Yeah. Wow, this could be an early night. Also, I wanted to mention, there is a school of Buddhism alive and well in the West today called the New Kadampa. And I caution you about them. I don't know too much about them, but I know that they have issued threats against the Dalai Lama's life. That's pretty intense. Mainly because he said, I think, some things they didn't like about their main tutelary deity. That's the story I've heard. So you should be cautious about any connection with the New Kadampa. I don't know too much about it. I've just heard these bad things. Anybody else know any more? No, Michael doesn't. Barry, no.
Somebody warned me off of them too, and I Googled, and there were stories of exploitation of people who were needy and financially kind of trying to get money from them.
I have a confirmed firsthand account of how they were cultish like that. And when I went to attend some open meditation centers, they had sessions they had on Sundays in Westchester, where I raised my family. If you didn't have the $20 to get in, they wouldn't let you in. So quite the opposite of generosity and donation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the only sort of Buddhist phenomena that I've ever heard such bad things about. Although there's other funny ones like the Japanese Nichiren Shoshu, where you can chant for refrigerators or a new car or a love affair or whatever it is you're looking for. And I actually went to a meeting in Manhattan of Nichiren Shoshu. I just wanted to see what it was like. And I sat in a room of maybe at least 100 people, all chanting this chant that you chant for whatever you like, you know, and you're meditating on it. Nam-myo Renge Kai. So there are some strange things out there, but it's very popular.
John,
Tony,
I have a quick question, which is sort of, I noticed a reference in this reading to control, and I'm wondering, you know, does Siddhar Control Rinpoche fit anywhere in here into this? I know that he's Nyingma. Is that correct? Am I correct when I say that?
Siddhar Kongtrul, yes, he is. And I think he's in that lineage. Jamgon Kongtrul the Great, the 5 incarnations of one of which was Jamgon Kongtrul of Shechen, and that was Trungpa Rinpoche's. And I think Dzigar Kongtrul is in part of that lineage. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dzigar,
In the 19th century in India, there was a great phenomena. There were 3 extraordinary teachers, and they were dear friends. One was named Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Taye. That's why they all had many names, but he's mainly known as Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Taye, often called Jamgon Kongtrul the Great. And then they were all Nyingma. And another one was Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, who, you know, we studied with Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, and he was an incarnation of Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. And he's had incarnations now, which are alive and well. And then the third was, I'm always forgetting his name. I'll look it up for next week, I'm sorry. I've got it actually in another part of my computer here. And the third one was a very interesting guy. All these 3 were Tertons. That means they were discoverers of, you know, terma, hidden texts that came down from Padmasambhava primarily, but others as well. And so this third fellow was illiterate. And he and Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, the story goes, received, you know, a mind terma, you know, sort of through the air, the same one. And they both wrote it down. Now, how this guy, since he was illiterate, wrote it down, I'm not sure. And then they compared their texts and they were identical. I love these stories. You only get them in the Nyingma sect. But they were all 3 really remarkable. And Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, many great teachings. Well, okay, Robert.
Good evening. There was a statement that the study is a big project and you better not fall asleep at the wheel. Could you please expand on that?
He said that?
It was stated, yeah. It's a big project, but you better not, and you better not fall asleep at the wheel. That's what I wrote.
Yes, he did.
Okay. Want to say anything, Barry? I don't know. It's a warning, you know. I mean, I guess these teachers.
I think it's just part of him saying that this is a big deal, and you know it can't be taken lightly, and that you need to really apply discipline and exertion. I mean that was my reading on it. And
you need to be practicing and studying while you practice these slogans. And that
yes.
Territon's name was Chokyur Lingpa. Senior moment finally popped into my head. Chokyur Lingpa. Illiterate. And he receives terma. How does that happen? Only in the Tibetan tradition. Yeah, I just think it means that you better be practicing and studying as you practice these slogans.
Yeah, I think it's all about being awake.
And compassionate.
And I think we're almost out of time.
Yeah, no, it's 6:30, yes.
Yeah, 8:30.
All right.
Could I jump the gun on that discussion you said about practicing the slogans and coming back and report?
Yes, please.
Well, today I was actually practicing the slogans. I was listening to Pema give a little, it's a part of an audio book she has. And I was listening and practicing it. And while practicing the slogans, I found myself caught up in an imaginary battle with my stepdaughter who was coming over in a couple of hours. And she's my best teacher because she's totally narcissistic, selfish, and everyone would agree with me on that.
And she's your Tibetan T-boy.
And this was in the middle of practicing the slogans. I was imagining all the possible things she could say that would expose her selfishness and self-centeredness and how I would confront them on the spot. Right while I was practicing the slogans.
Terrific.
Caught up in this story.
So she's your Tibetan T-boy.
She's my Tibetan T-boy, right? She's my everything. Right? She's what Pema Chodron says, nothing ever goes away till it teaches you what you need to know.
You're lucky you have her right in your family, Dan.
Oh, yeah. Lucky me.
We expect big things.
No need to look any further.
Cuts down on the commute time. The commute time to my anger. Right.
Don't we usually close at 7? I mean, at
yeah, we have another half. Yeah, we have another half hour if you want. I mean,
well, we have one because we have one hand up here. Lodro.
Thank you, John. I wanted to ask, what are some of the main signs or what are some of the main things to recognize in a Kalyana Mitra?
That's a really profound question. And I think some of it goes beyond what should be said in a group like this. It has to do with very personal and intimate relationships that form. And other than that, I think the person, it's the obvious things, that they speak to your intelligence and key it, arouse it, and your inspiration. And that above all, that you have an open-hearted communication with that person. Trungpa Rinpoche always emphasized that there should be open-hearted communication. Friendship, deep. The deeper, the better.
From that perspective, would a Kalyana Mitra have to be a Buddhist teacher, or can it be someone beyond the technical terms of the Dharma?
I think it could be someone beyond the technical terms of the Dharma, but it'll be limited. There'll be a limit to how far that can go. And remember, a Kalyana Mitra is the teacher at the Mahayana stage of the path. Beyond that, at the Vajrayana stage of the path, the teacher becomes the Vajra master and is characterized somewhat differently. Still has all the qualities that the Kalyana Mitra had, but more.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Robert.
I didn't quite get the question. Would Lodro please restate the question?
It was related to how to best recognize when we meet a Kalyana Mitra, the spiritual friend that talks to us in the way from so many different teachers, so many different people that can present the Dharma to us, but eventually reach the level of a Kalyana Mitra, and as opposed to just a teacher.
Thank you.
And what I'm taking the most from that is the intimacy and the friendship element, going beyond the intellect and touching more on a heart level, something that I'm taking from that. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Great question. Trungpa Rinpoche always emphasized, people were so in awe of different teachers, that were great figures. And he always emphasized that the most important aspect of the relationship with the teacher is open communication and friendship, deep. It's almost saying the same thing, or very similar. Danielle.
Hi, this question is probably pretty basic, but can you explain a little bit about the incarnations of the teachers? You were talking about they come back incarnations, and I kind of don't totally understand all that, like how they know that and stuff. Is that too historic?
Well, I'll just give you the lore, The idea is that everybody comes back. We're going to come back too, whether we're enlightened or not. Enlightened people supposedly have the option of not coming back. But many enlightened people do return out of compassion for sentient beings. When I listened to Trungpa Rinpoche talk about it, I sort of felt like people come back, these enlightened people who don't have to, because they want to keep the conversation going. They're having this wonderful communication, with the students. And so this is a relatively new phenomena. It didn't exist at the time of the Buddha, these recognized incarnations. The oldest of them is the Karmapa. The current one is the 17th in his line. The Dalai Lama is the 14th in his line. And Trungpa Rinpoche he was the 11th, and now there's a new Trungpa who's the 12th. So they come back out of compassion to help us achieve enlightenment. They are recognized. There is a system of recognition. And it used to be, there's a book about somebody being recognized. I can't remember, I read it years ago. The idea is that, so for instance, the Karmapa, the 16th, I don't know about the 17th, I just don't know enough about him. But the 16th had this talent for finding reincarnations. And the story goes that he would go into meditation, and then he would come out of it and he would tell an attendant, go to this particular village, and there on the bank of a stream, you'll find a house with a red door facing south. And you'll go inside and there'll be an infant, like 12 months old. And that's the new incarnation of blah, blah, blah. And then the attendant or the attendants that he had told this to would go to that house, they'd find it, they'd go inside, they'd find the child, and they would apply tests. And the tests would be that they would show the infant, if it was an infant, sometimes they'd be older than infancy, objects belonging to the previous incarnation. as well as objects that didn't belong to the previous incarnation. And they would look to see which objects the infant gravitated towards. Likewise, they would show this infant people who were known to the previous incarnation, as well as people who weren't, and to watch which people this infant gravitated towards. And if they gravitated towards the objects and people that were known to the previous incarnation, well, that was the test, and the infant passed the test. And they would be recognized. And if the parents agreed, and they almost always did, that I ever heard, the child would be taken and raised in the monastery as an incarnation of this. And so the parents would come along sometimes, especially if it was an infant, to help raise the child until they were no longer needed. So Trungpa Rinpoche maintained his relationship with his actual birth mother for some time, I think. And also he had a child, his first son, who's now the Sakyong Mipham Rinpoche. And Rinpoche brought the Sakyong's mother, with whom he had this child, to the States, to Boulder, and she became Lady Kunchuk, a lady of the court. And many of us knew her. So there's some lore for you.
John, who is the current reincarnation of Chogyam Trungpa, and where is he?
He's in Tibet. I don't know his Dharma name. Did anybody know it? They're all called the Trungpa Tulku. Tulku means reincarnate, enlightened person. And Trungpa is the line of the going from the first to the now 12th. And then they will each have a refuge name, and as well as other names that they get that are secret. The refuge name for the author of the book that we're reading was Chogyam, which is an abbreviation for Chökyi Gyamtso. And Chö means Dharma, Ki is a possessive, and Gyamtso is a word that translates ocean, great ocean. So it's ocean of Dharma. Hence the title of the book we're reading, The Found Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And there are many people here who've got their refuge names, right? Yes, indeed. And maybe there'll be a profound treasury of your ocean, your Dharma name at some point. Well, anybody else? Or shall we end? I can't stress that. That was a great question, Lodro. Trungpa Rinpoche has stressed that so much, that the essential nature of the relationship between a student and the teacher, the more profound the relationship, the more intimate, open, communicative, full of love and friendship, and maybe pain. It is. This is not an informational relationship. Beginning with the at the Hinayana stage of the path, the teacher is a preceptor, tells you what to do and what not to do, and is an example, sort of up there on a throne, as it were, of what you might become. At the Mahayana stage of the path, the Kalyana Mitra, it means spiritual friend. And there's more of an eye level relationship of openness and communication. And at the Vajrayana level, they talk about the Vajra master, and the relationship is very, very intimate and perhaps very fierce. Well, okay. Shall we say the closing chant? And close. Anybody else? Last? Going on. So here we go. I'll lead this one. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. So thanks. everybody.
Thank you. very much.
Thank you, John and Barry.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Barry.
John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Barry.
Everyone.
Thank you, John.
Have a great night.
See you tomorrow.
Good night, everybody.
Night,
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Night.